Hello, my name is Sofia Salinas. I am going to be presenting my change project, which had to do with implementing an effective positive behavior management system in upper elementary. I am the vice principal in Colegio Menor Quito in Ecuador, and I deal with fourth and fifth grade, so I'm the vice principal for upper elementary. This change project came to be because of some of the problems that I saw emerging, especially in terms of behavior management and restorative practices. And I saw a problem that needed to be addressed. So today we're going to be discussing my attempt to address it and the results that it yielded. First, we're going to look at the problem that needed to be addressed and the hypothesis. Then the research that I did to prepare myself for a plan, which was researching mostly restorative practices, positive behavior management systems, and social emotional learning. I will then also be discussing the methodology, what the plan was, and the steps that I took to reach this plan or to develop this plan. And of course, the results. What did the data suggest, and what is my personal experience regarding the implementation of an effective positive behavior management system. Finally, I'll also do some self-reflection in terms of how my leadership has adapted to this process and the next steps that I think are useful when considering how to implement an effective positive behavior management system, which was definitely something complicated and it's a work in progress. First of all, what is the question that led me to this work? I was wondering, how can restorative practices be implemented successfully and systemically across elementary teachers and staff? The reason that I started thinking about this question is because of mostly last year, especially because of the effects of the pandemic, there was a lot of behavior management and behavior incidents across all elementary. There was, of course, also the effects of the pandemic of lower social emotional development in our students. There was many students that didn't know how to deal with certain conflicts, and that results from 3 years of staying at home. There was also a student and teacher overall sense of lack of consequences, and that was problematic because it led to a lack of cooperation and also ineffective behavior management and overall teacher and student burnout. So I wanted to see what could be done. This was also a year where we started implementing restorative practices in a much higher degree, and that also came with pushback and a feeling of a lack of consequences. So my work was related to this problem that I felt needed to be addressed. What is the hypothesis? So when I began this work, the hypothesis is that an effective and systemic use of restorative practice under a positive behavior management system will first lead to clarity and alignment on a system-wide procedure and hierarchical roles. And I think that that's something that many staff members felt was missing. There was a lot of professional development and a lot of talk on restorative practices. However, what they felt was missing was a whole system procedure that gave them steps as to what to do and how to use this tool. It also fosters teacher ownership of student behavior management. When they know what their role is, teachers are more likely to take ownership of that role. It encourages accountability on behalf of students, especially if used adequately. It leads to learning. It doesn't lead to just punitive consequences. It leads to a learning on behalf of students. Thus, it helps them take ownership. It leads to continuity between one section of school to the next. So I was also seeking to find a system that made sense for not just upper elementary, but that could be continued or could be adapted, but in the same line through middle school and high school. And the hypothesis as well is that it would decrease major incident reports. That was kind of the purpose, is that at the end, we want a positive behavior management system to decrease the frequency or decrease the severity of behavior incidents. So I began this work by looking at restorative practices and by really getting familiar and becoming familiar and becoming an expert on restorative practices and the reason behind restorative practices. There is a lot of research going on here, but the gist of it is that restorative practices, they have a reason to be. They aim to restore and to repair, while punitive discipline it seeks to have retribution, right? And that is something that doesn't necessarily lead to learning. Restorative practices also build student to student and student to teacher relationships, so they're founded on healthy relationships. Restorative practices teach students key conflict resolution skills that will be useful for their entire lives. So if used adequately, restorative practices are not just for that behavior incident, they are for lifelong learning. I also needed to look at how to merge restorative practices with a behavior management system. I didn't want to just stay in restorative practices because that's something that teachers have felt and staff have felt that have been a replacement of a system, which it hasn't. So I looked into positive behavior management systems and saw that, of course, restorative practices need to be used, but they should be used as a tool to create positive behavior outcome, while positive behavior management systems, what they do is they provide a concrete and structured system that everyone can align to. So in all of the kind of subjectivity of restorative practices, a positive behavior management system produces clarity, which is something I felt my teachers needed. I also looked at how to ground this work, and I think when we're looking at a system, we always want the system to have a purpose. Besides the restorative practices, which are the tool to produce positive behavior outcomes, I wanted there to be a scope and sequence of learning. So I wanted to make sure that all teachers had the scope and sequence regarding what the students would learn if this behavior management system was applied adequately. And what I found was very useful was the social-emotional learning framework of CASEL. So there's several different social-emotional competencies that we can address, like self-management, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, social awareness, relationship skills. And the idea here was to align the behavior management system to these competencies so that we can target each incident in terms of the competence that needs development. So what was the plan? So once I started thinking about how to develop this system, I wanted to make sure I developed it, shared, and implemented this system founded on social-emotional learning and the CASEL framework and restorative practices. So the first steps was, of course, set the mindset and ask for teacher feedback. I knew that this was going to be a difficult work because there was already pushback for restorative practices. So I started setting this mindset from June of 2022 and continued to do this in our pre-service workshops in September 2022. I, of course, developed the system and I did consider our school code of conduct when developing the system, again, so that we can ensure continuity across all sections. I did this June 2022 up until July 2022, so I worked a little bit in our vacation so that I could get it very well developed. I shared the system with the teachers after I set their mindset in September 2022. And this process has been, a couple of months have been tracking the progress in terms of teacher buy-in, effective implementation, and the frequency of major incident reports. So that's been this entire academic school year up until January 2023. How do I develop and share the system? So first here, I tried to set the mindset and I tried to set foundational rules like creating a classroom environment that aligns to our work, right? So giving teachers tools, for example, warm welcomes, emotional check-ins, community circles, community walls, banking time. So I gave them those tools so that they could also use them to prevent incident reports, because that's one of the very important things about restorative practices is the prevention part. So I set the mindset in that way, and I also set the mindset with few sessions on the importance of perspective and understanding that student behavior is not personal. So I thought that that was very important work before actually sharing the positive behavior management system, PBMS. Once I set the mindset, I worked on several different workshops to show and share the PBMS system with teachers aligned to our code of conduct, so they could see what each step would result in. So our code of conduct is categorized into minor, serious, and very serious incidents. So there was steps in each one of those categories in which teachers knew exactly what they needed to do, how to do it, and what would result of it. There was also clear guidelines as to what these steps what are the steps that teachers needed to take. I developed a positive behavior management system matrix where each behavior was aligned to a social-emotional learning competency that needed to be targeted, as well as a bank of restorative practice resources to target that competency. So there was a lot of clarity for teachers so that they knew exactly where to find things and how to use them. There was also templates for communication at home. I know that that's one of the biggest teacher concerns or teacher problems, is sending those email home and communicating with parents. So there was templates that allowed more direction for teachers on how to email home with no feel do, which is something that I also researched, is how to communicate in a way that is effective with our parents, as well as parent meeting guidelines. So what is the data that I gathered after a few months of the implementation of this system? I used a form to ask all of my teachers, which weren't that many. There were 15 teachers that are in 4th and 5th grade. I used a form to ask about the PBMS system, how they feel about the PBMS system, the level of awareness they have about the PBMS system. One was, as you can see, the biggest population fell under somewhat comfortable or somewhat aware. So it's not extremely aware, but it's somewhat. Same thing for if they've used the PBMS system, how frequently they've used it, what step did they stay in when using the PBMS system. So most of my teachers have used the PBMS system, which is great. But one thing that they do is that they stay in the first steps of the PBMS system, which means they don't really take it to the next level, which is that communication to parents and that home connection, which is one major part of the system. There's also the idea of the effectiveness of the system, which most people said somewhat effective. I also got written personal feedback from my teachers, where most teachers liked the system, found it somewhat effective, but there was a lot of things to improve. One of the things that they considered that needed to be improved is the time effectiveness of the system. With any positive behavior management system, time is always a constraint. That was something that they noticed, as well as the awareness, the student awareness or the teacher awareness of the system is something that they felt needed fixing. So here I just went through the data and kind of evaluated the data and identified that, of course, there needs to be more awareness from teachers and from students of the system. But what I did find in my personal experience is that compared to last year, even though that this year there needs to be more awareness of the system and teachers feel that it's somewhat effective, not extremely effective, but somewhat effective, what I did notice and what I was able to see is that compared to last year, there has been a decrease of incident reports. And of course, this is not an accurate comparison since the school year hasn't ended, but that is also part of my evaluation, that there was a decrease in incident reports and in the severity of the incident reports. So, what is my self-reflection here? I think through this process, there was many different leadership